Okay. Let's get this going. Finally. Okay. Right. Okay. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Thank you for your patience while things were getting going here. Today we're going to be looking at another one of my very favorite artists of all time. This time we're going to a whole different part of the world than I think we've been to before. We've pretty much looked at every continent except South America. So we're going to the beautiful country of Brazil today to celebrate Brazil's independence today. It is the 7th of September, and it's a day of celebration in Brazil. So let's now turn our attention to the greatest artist of all time from Brazil, Tarsila do Amaral, or Tarsila do Amaral. And I've seen it, obviously you have to excuse my pronunciation. Portuguese is just not a language you hear very often in Canada, and while I've seen this artist's work over the decades and been an admirer of her work, and she certainly had a major resurgence over the past 4 or 5 years, it's funny, these are sometimes the first time I've ever said some of these names aloud, so my apologies. Tarsila is without a doubt the most important modern artist in the history of Brazil, certainly the most famous and the most beloved artist. We're going to be looking at this painting, Abaporu, which is also her most significant artwork, which I don't know if it's ironically, but it is it's really probably one of the most important artworks in the collection of the biggest museum in Argentina, which I'm sure does not go missed, or is not go unnoticed by people in Brazil. Why is the greatest artwork by the greatest artist in arguably the history of Brazil, why is that residing in Argentina, the big soccer rival? Well, that's a whole other story that we're going to get into through today's episode here. So, I had a lot of tech issues getting running today, so I apologize. It's just the nature of the beast doing this live streaming stuff, but I think everything's now stable and ready to go. So what I want to start off by doing is letting people know about the outline that you can print off so that you can get about as accurate of a drawing, a composition as possible. Now today's picture is fairly straightforward. You probably don't need it, but if you want it, I'm going to show you just how to do it here real quick. You can see all of these other paintings that we've already done. We're here on episode 64 of the Master Study, and let's click right in here. And if you click in there, there's 6 different files in there. You're going to see this image, and then you're going to see 2 versions of the outline. One's a JPEG and one's a PDF, otherwise identical, whichever one's easier for you to print out. And then this is kind of another one of her quite well-known artworks. This is actually in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and there's also an outline for that. So if you're feeling really excited and you want to do 2 artworks today, or maybe save another one for later, I'm not going to do the second artwork today, but I always, as things have progressed, I've thought, like, it's sometimes very hard for me to decide which artwork to do, so sometimes I'll do 2 outlines and put them up there, and I notice a number of you guys will go ahead and do it. So anyway, there's the outlines in the Dropbox, and I'm going to do that in just a moment. I'll also let you know that there is a Facebook group just for people who are painting along and watching today, and it's a great place for you to upload your version of today's painting. as well as artworks that you're working on your own. Remember, just this weekend we had a feedback episode, and I do that usually about once a month, and I take a look at all the great work that you've been working on, and I give you some constructive feedback and lots of kudos and celebration, because anyone who's watching right now who's painting along with me, making artwork, deserves a good old pat on the back. And you know, despite, I mean, this looks fantastic, Maria. That's cool. That is really lovely. Good job. I love the brushstrokes in here. It's a lot. We got some kind of cubist stuff going on there, which I remember seeing. Was it your version of the Nelson Mandela we did? That's really cool. Oh wow! And here's the Matthew Wong we did. So anyway, lots of stuff on there. I strongly encourage you to check it out. And it's such a supportive community, and it just keeps growing by person by person by person. I don't let everybody in there, so I'm trying to screen out all the scammers and stuff. So let's move on here to Tarsila and just take a quick little look at her biography. Born in 1886, which, you know, puts her almost to the date of like many other modernist contemporaries. And by modernist, it's sometimes a little confusing for people who aren't familiar with these terms. Modern art essentially is a term that covers art from, let's say, the Impressionist period to like the 1960s, kind of Andy Warhol. So you could kind of think about like Claude Monet being roughly at the beginning of modern art, and Andy Warhol being kind of at the end of modern art. And this is, there's people who've made there's thousands and thousands of PhD theses about all this. Some people would say modern art ends around the time of pop art or after pop art, and then we have what we call the postmodern era, which arguably we're still living in right now. Right, but that's a whole other thing. But anyway, it puts, you know, her birth date here is roughly around the same time as many other artists like Pablo Picasso and Tom Thompson. So you kind of get a little bit of an idea of the time period that she's growing up in. And she lives a long, fantastic life, painting pretty much right up until the end. Dies in 1973. So you can imagine what she saw over that period of time. So she is, what do I want to say right off the top here before we just get into painting? You know, she grew up in Brazil at a time when Brazil was quite conservative. You know, Brazil is kind of famously a fairly religious country, and you know, you've probably seen, if anything, probably one of the most recognizable images of Brazil is the towering figure of Christ that overlooks Sao Paulo. And particularly in the time she was growing up, the role of women in society was extremely limited. And she, even though she was actually born into a fairly wealthy family that was in the coffee industry, she didn't have a lot of opportunities. And ironically enough, the way that Brazilian life was sort of stratified at that particular time is wealthy women were even less likely to pursue an education than women who grew up in poorer families, right? Which is, you know, sounds a little bit strange, but it kind of goes back into, you know, very traditional roles for women. So, but what is interesting is that her family was very supportive of her interest in pursuing art, and so she took some art classes and eventually ended up going as a teenager to Paris or Spain, Barcelona, and studying art there. And then she goes to Paris. She comes, and while she's there, she's you know, right in the epicenter of what's going on in the art world at the time. and she meets many of the most famous artists at the time. And so when she comes back to Sao Paulo in 1922 here, she is... It's like she's gone and seen all of this interesting stuff and bringing it back to her friends. You know, it's not like Brazil was in a bubble or anything, and people were aware of what's going on, but she was one of those persons that had actually gone and seen this stuff, seen all the Cubist paintings, Futurist paintings, Fauvist paintings, all of the other isms that were going on in Paris at the time. She kind of saw that, brought it back, and could regale her friends with stories of meeting Picasso and Matisse and all this kind of stuff, which sort of instantly made her a celebrity within the community. We'll talk about her relationship with her husband and cannibalism, as and the Cannibalist Manifesto, which is a very famous text of his. Let's see. Maybe I don't know if it's mentioned in here, but she comes back. She helps form this group, the Grupo dos Cinco, which is a very important group of artists that have some very important exhibitions in Brazil that really sort of help kick off a whole new approach to painting within Brazilian culture. And throughout her life, if there's really one thing that you would want to remember when you're thinking about her, is she was a very ambitious artist. She literally stated that, I want to be Brazil's painter. Like, I want to be synonymous with Brazil, and it's pretty hard to argue. I mean, she managed to achieve these lofty goals for herself. Or I think maybe right here, I feel myself ever more Brazilian. I want to be the painter of my country. Wow, right? I mean, and yeah, absolutely accomplished that goal. So she also studies, when she's in Paris, she kind of goes back and forth a few times. She studies with, here's Fernand Léger, who is a very famous French painter. And he wasn't one of the creators of Cubism, but he becomes really one of its most famous and most visible practitioners. And let's see if we could just see a few of his paintings here, because I think we can talk a lot about her work in relationship to his, and then where she kind of takes some, where the paths diverge, which I think is really interesting. Oh, come on, there's got to be, where's all his paintings? We've got to see one of his very famous. We don't. That's okay. Let's. Oops. Okay, so here's some of his work, just so you can kind of get an idea. One of the terms that comes up in relationship to Fernand Léger's work is this tubism, because he often has these round shapes and they're rendered on all sides. So unlike cubism, which is very angular shapes, the origins of it, he embraces cubism, but becomes more known as a practitioner of synthetic cubism, as opposed to analytical cubism, which was Picasso and Braque were analytical cubists at the beginning of the movement. Léger sort of takes the idea of cubism and the way that it sort of looks, and then sort of starts playing with it and really diverging from the original idea of cubism. Anyway, I think this is kind of it helps to kind of see his influence in her work, because it's certainly there. But if we go to her work now, we can see that, especially in the painting we're going to work on today, we can see this tubist influence, but she certainly starts going in a very, very different direction very quickly. I think he was her teacher, right in like early 1925-ish or so. 1923. So you kind of see in some of these, tend to be some of her most famous works. We see some of that influence, but she lived another 50 years after that very brief education with him. Okay, so let's get right into the painting itself here. And I want to show you how I'm going to do my outline. Looks like that's all right. Okay. Okay. So, what I'm going to paint on is a 9x12 sized canvas. If you want to get the exact kind of canvas that I'm using, there's a link in the description below. I buy these thin canvas boards off of Amazon because they're a little bit better than the cheap ones you can get at your local dollar store. And then I take some white gesso, acrylic gesso, and I brush it on, let it dry, and then I sand it with some 220 grit sandpaper. And that helps get this surface pretty much about as... I could get it even smoother if I put another layer of gesso and then sanded it again, and it would be almost like a piece of paper. But I think this is pretty good, especially for today's painting. We don't need it to be super smooth. So, I've got a pencil, some carbon paper, and tape. Again, I could just eyeball this, but I'm in one of those things... When everything sort of goes sideways a little bit, as things did for me to getting ready for today's episode, it's like, you know what? Let's just minimize the variables and just try to just get through today. So I'm going to just put my carbon paper, and you can use graphite paper for this, carbon paper. One-sided is enough. This is double-sided carbon paper. So, and you should be able to find this at any major art supply store. If you can't find it, there's an Amazon link in the description below. Although I think the Amazon link that I've given is for like 50 sheets, which is fine. It's just, it's going to take you a while to use up all 50 of those sheets of carbon paper, right? And... I think one of these days I'm going to transition just to using red pens, because I'm using a red pencil, and I'm also using actually pretty good pencils, colored pencils for this, which means that they tend to be kind of soft, which is really great for most applications, but when you're kind of doing a tracing like this and you're trying to press a little bit harder, you can see that it causes the tips to break a little bit. So what we're looking at here is this person who's sitting on this hill in a kind of fairly contemplative frame of mind. It's this person's also been likened to Rodin's The Thinker. You've probably seen that very famous sculpture of the man kneeling on his wrist, or not kneeling, resting his head on his hand, which is also his elbows resting on his knee. And that sculpture was done, when was the Rodin sculpture? That would have been late 1800s, I'm pretty sure. And obviously, I mean, it was pretty famous from the moment it was created. Rodin was a very famous sculptor, French sculptor. Anyway, so that's, you know, a lot of people will say that that's what this image is. Let me just capture that, right? And then sitting next to this cactus and this yellow sphere, which is in her original intent is supposed to be a flower from the cactus, although she acknowledges it also looks a lot like the sun, and I think that is serving a dual purpose. I don't think it was one or the other. I think it's the idea of the cactus is actually maybe causing the bloom of the sun as well, or the anyway. So let's move things right along here. I'm going to put some of my yellow that I normally put on my paintings. I haven't done it in some of the most recent ones, just to kind of throw you guys off. I know a few of you have started ahead and then like, oh, he's not using the yellow today. Today I'm using the yellow because I think it's actually going to work out really nice. In fact, I'm just going to put a little bit more on here. I kind of want a nice, bright... I mean, I don't think she put this color down, just in case you're wondering. I looking at the original, let's put them up side by side. I don't think she did this. I think she probably painted it right onto a white canvas. If I just zoom in here, I don't see any kind of the tell. Yeah, you can almost see right here this little bit of the white canvas showing through between the blue and her arm. But if you know me, this is something that I like a lot. I like the look of the warm yellow coming through in the painting. So if you want to do this, you're certainly welcome to. If you don't want to do this and you want to paint directly onto the white canvas, you can do that as well. I do think that, especially if you're a beginner artist, having a little bit of extra color of any kind, even if it's just a slightly different off-white, I just think it will take some of the pressure off of trying to... like, I literally think it's just, it helps just put something there. And once the whole painting is covered with a foundational wash like this, it just sort of helps get over this mental block of and the fear of putting paint onto the camp. Now, of course, there's all sorts of other reasons that I do this as well, but I think in some ways that might be the most powerful one. It's just the painting. We've got paint over every square inch of the canvas. It's too late to turn back now. We're not going to paint anything else on top of here because we're sealing in the pencil lines. It's sort of like, yeah, we've crossed the Rubicon, and we're in it now, right? So I think this is actually going to yield a really beautiful color when we're done. So, and you know, one of the things that she did in her work is to actually use the colors of the Brazilian flag in her work. And if you're familiar at all with the Brazilian flag, yellow and green and white are very prominent colors and very important to, I mean, you see they're often in clothing of Brazil, etc. Okay. So, I think I'm gonna blow dry this in a moment. Let's just let it dry on its own for a second. I'm going to get out my paint, so we'll put the paint on the palette. And yeah, I see lots of comments in the chat there, especially as I was getting set up. I haven't had a chance to read any of it because it was a little bit... I see Donna says, Michael's probably frantic at this moment. Oh, yes, yes. Definitely some stressful moments when you see that the class has begun and nothing's happening on my end. It is, whew, it's like having 5 cups of coffee all at once. Right, you get that hot sweat going on. Whew, okay, so I think everything's going okay. Well, I don't want to speak too soon because you never know here, right? So if you're brand new and you're joining me for the first time, which the majority of people who end up watching these are brand new, have never seen me before, and you want to know what colors I'm using, the names of the colors, all that kind of fun stuff, there is a video that I did almost exactly a year ago. Probably would have been very close to a year ago. Oops. Okay, so this is why I should see at the end of the day, sometimes I just let these tubes of paint, the lid's not quite fully on, and they get these right. So I think I just got to unscrew this. But I always, there's got to be some use for this kind of stuff, right? Yeah, so I made a video explaining all of this about a year ago, and you can buy in the description below. You'll see a link to all of the tubes of paint if you want to buy them directly from Amazon. Although I would say you probably want to do a double check and make sure that your local art supply store doesn't have them for less. Because while Amazon might be good for many things, art supplies, it's good, especially paint, things that they have to mail and ship, and paint is something that can be a little bit problematic to put in the mail, and it's a little, there's a bit of bureaucratic stuff about, which for good reason. You don't want to, some paint can explode if it's mailed. So it's just a little bit, sometimes more expensive than it needs to be. So I encourage you also just to support your local art supply store. Here in Vancouver, there's a great one called Wrath Art Supplies on Main Street. Okay, so now I've got my canvas already prepped. I got my colors on the palette. Now I'm at first glance, you're looking at the original painting and thinking, well, I'm probably not going to use. All I just need is some yellow and blue and green, right? But we're going to use some of these colors to make some of the flesh tones. So it's possible that I might not use one of the colors, but I'm not exactly even sure which one that might be. I might not use the cold red, but that might be the only color I don't actually use on my palette at this moment. Okay, so how about the first thing I want to do is put some color in the background. And as you know, what I like to do is start in the background, then go to the foreground, do a little bit of work there, go back to the background, finish that, and then come back to the background, finish the background, and then we should be all done. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some cool blue and some white and put a generous helping of that all over in the background. So let's just take a bunch of this together. If anything, I'll probably use a little bit more white in here, because that's going to help cover up some of the yellow, which you're probably saying, well, what's the whole point of putting the yellow down? Part of the reason I love some of that yellow coming through, and it won't completely disappear, but let's see. I think that's good. If anything, I would probably go for a little bit more white, and then I can always, on the second layer, go a little bit darker. I kind of would hesitate to go too dark right off the bat, otherwise then you're going to have to go lighter on a subsequent layer. Now, I'm not going to be afraid of painting over any of my pencil lines a little bit. In fact, I would encourage it. That way we kind of have a seamless border between the background and the foreground here. So... And the reason why I'm going to do 2 coats is I can, well, maybe this will be enough. It's just in certain places it's a little bit thin. The second coat can be really, really loose, and you know, doesn't have to be quite as opaque. You know, I don't know. Maybe the way it's turning out, I could be convinced just to go 1 coat of blue in the background. And I might even, just as I'm looking at this, thinking to myself, you know what, maybe we could just do, should we do all the blue all at once? I don't know. Think about it. Because there's the one way, which would be very different than what we've done in the past, is to paint the entire background and basically finish it before moving on to the foreground. Just want to make sure I got all of the spaces covered in here. And you can see, like, I've gone in a little bit more than that elbow here because I'm going to paint over top of it, so I'd rather make sure that there wasn't a little gap in there. Okay. I mean, already I think it's looking pretty good. Maybe... I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint the green grass below next. So I'm going to take some of this cold blue and cold yellow and mix this together. We need a bit more yellow in here. And I'm going to paint this down here. It's got a little bit of white because I was a little lazy and didn't clean my brush. But as I said, I might do another coat of all of these. Anyway, that's why I'm generally at this stage not super concerned about color accuracy or anything. Just wanted to get the whole painting covered. You can see I'm also using a pretty big brush for this. I think I will just stop down to one just a little bit smaller just to kind of get into some of these details here. So, you know, this would be an area where doing another coat would certainly improve the way it looks. It's a little bit patchy down there. You know what? I think I'm also going to use, since I've got this color, I'm going to paint it on the cactus. And I think I'll ultimately put a darker green, a warmer green on here. It's also very satisfying to use a big brush to do big areas like this and building up a little bit of confidence and applying big areas of color quickly. And just a few little places where that yellow is showing through. Just take a small brush and boom, boom, boom. Gotcha. Gotcha. And that tells me that's a little place where I'll do a little bit of touch up. Otherwise, I think that's really good for, what, 10 minutes at the beginning of the painting. Obviously, it looks a little bit sloppy right now, but as you know, we'll clean it all up as shortly here. I think I'm gonna blow dry it and do the blue right now. I think. Should I? Well, the blue's already drying a bit here. So maybe what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint just for the sake of speed. I think what I will do is I will paint the blue again. And then I'll paint the figure, so I'll be basically done the blue. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. Here. So I'm gonna mute the microphone for him. Okay, so I figured, you know, while I was doing that, I just blow dried the bottom down here. Sorry, there's our daughter waking up. Okay, that's good. Okay. There's a bit of white in here, meaning this. Oops, and this was not quite dry. Not the biggest fan of this white being, I mean, it's super subtle, but if I was going for a little bit more fidelity here, then I would mix this again. And you can see, it's probably not very visible, but this is an area where there was a lot more paint, and it wasn't quite dry when I painted over top of it, so I kind of scooped away some of the original color that was there. But I will be doing a little bit of shading on here, so I think that will, yeah, let's, should I just build that up a bit? I'll take care of it right now. There we go. Okay, cool. This, as I said, I'm going to put a bit of a warmer brown over top of there. So I'll just leave that on its own. Okay. So I'm going to clean this brush off thoroughly. And then I'm going to paint the blue in the background. I might actually just blow dry this bottom down here. That way I don't get any blue mixing into the green that I just painted. So maybe I'll just do that. Still a little, I mean, it takes a couple extra seconds, but it just will prevent any kind of frustration. Okay, so it's not completely dry down there. That's okay. I don't need it to be bone dry. I just need to make sure that where those two colors match, that it's as dry as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to mix this blue for the background again. I need a little bit more blue. And really now I can decide, like, do I want it to be darker or lighter? I mean, I think I actually got it pretty darn close before, so I'm just going to do the same thing again. So let's just take some white. I'll just use a bigger batch, that way I can be sure that I've got the same color consistently over the whole surface of that background. And yeah, now we got a nice, beautiful, clean background here to get right in between. Beautiful. And again, I don't really care if I go over top of any of the lines. That's gorgeous. Now it looks really nice. You know, and I know you could go. I could have gone much faster if I was like on a speed painting competition. I certainly would have gone. I would have probably painted that first layer of paint more thickly. But I think this is going to get the best results. And really, we're just talking about an extra 15 minutes maybe, right? And if you're going to be investing a couple of hours of your time into making a painting, 15 more minutes to make a painting that is going to have like a absolutely exceptional foundational structure, just makes all that difference. You know, it's the same sort of thing like if you're, you know, making some kind of dish with your grandma on an important day like Brazilian Independence Day, and she tells you to stir the soup or knead the dough exactly 50 times, and you're like, ugh, this is a waste, right? And then you cut a few corners, and then you taste your version of it versus your grandmother's version. You're like, ah, okay, so that's I guess that's why you do that, right? So yeah, so a few places obviously where I've gone over top of things. There's a few ways that I can deal with that, because I think I've got this background really I think that is really nice. Okay. Just gonna wipe that off so I can put it in the water. Okay. So, if I look at the original, just thinking about where I cut in, you can see that I don't mind covering up those areas. I think I might even just take a little bit of white and touch some of that up, which sounds sort of like, you know, kind of backtracking a little bit, but it just, now I'm going to be able to get a much smoother lines over top of some of this here. So ideally I should wait for some of the paint to dry a little bit, but I'm gonna just plow forward here. If it gets a little bit of blue in there, it'll be okay. I'm gonna paint over top of this with some warm yellow. Again, I know that this is a little bit going out of the way, but this painting is relatively straightforward, and I think to myself, like, okay, what's the point of one of these episodes? Is it just to do the painting as quickly as possible and then you get a pretty good version of the painting? Or especially if it's kind of on the little bit more straightforward, simple aspect, we could just take a little bit of extra time and do like a masterful version of it. And I think, oh, why don't we try to do that? Let's try to do like the best possible version of this painting. So I'm not gonna do all of the tiny little details in here. I just, wherever I kind of was a little bit quick with my brush, clean those areas up. And it doesn't have to be like a super thick coating. Like, I'll just zoom in a few places here. Like, let's say down by the feet here. Like, there's a little bit of the paint, kind of the green and blue kind of coming through. But I think we're gonna create an awesome painting today for an awesome day, for an awesome artist. Okay. And you know, the color I'm about to put on top of this is going to have some white in it anyway. So this is really sort of just going above and beyond. But as I said, why not if it's not like there's a lot of other details I got to worry about in this painting. And sometimes, you know, when you've got a painting that compositionally is fairly straightforward, any kind of sloppiness or laziness is going to be more apparent, more evident than otherwise would be, because it's not like there's a lot of other things to distract our attention from it, right? Okay. That's good. I think that's good enough. So, I'm just going to clean that off. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to, there's a couple of things we could do, actually. One of which is we could paint the yellow back over top of this and get an even more unified image, and then paint the skin tone over top of it. I think I'm just going to mix the skin tone and paint that next here. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to mix a warm flesh tone. So let's take some warm yellow. I'll probably use most of that. So I'm going to take this warm yellow. I'm going to take a bit of warm red. Let's mix this in here. We want to get kind of an orange. You notice how I basically had like at least 2-to-1 yellow to warm red, right? Warm yellow to warm red. And then I'm going to take a little bit of blue. We don't need a lot of it. What the blue is going to do, it's going to turn this from an orange into a brown. Right? And a little, like just a very little bit of blue is pretty much all you need here. So now I'm going to take some white and dip that right into here. And that white will also tell us a little bit more about what color we've got mixed here. I think this might be pretty good. I think I'm going to need more of it. So I'm actually just going to add more paint to the mixture now. That way I've got a nice big... So what I wouldn't do this right off the top. What I would do is I would start by mixing a smaller batch, and then you get kind of an idea of where you want to be color-wise. And then you can add a little bit more to it. So it's sort of like baking, and you're doubling and tripling your measurements, right? I'm just going to sort of make the first batch and just make sure that my original measurements are correct, right? Before I just start heaping cups of flour and sugar into a bowl, right? Mix it together. Okay, that looks like my measurements are correct. Now I can just double and triple that stuff, right? So let's see, how is that color? Looks like it could use just a little bit more white in here. I think even just a little bit more red. If anything, the color that I would put the least in would be the blue. We just need a little bit of that, and it'll kick that color from orange into brown zone. Okay. So I'm just going to use a little bit of a larger brush just to get some of the larger areas in. And then we'll just kind of see color-wise. Not bad. I think I'm pretty close. Now, there is white in this color, which is going to cover up some pencil lines. Maybe not every single one of them, but just be mindful of that. Again, this is a fairly straightforward painting, so I'm not really worried about, you know, having to find where the fingers are and everything, because really, it's, you know, there's only so many places for those fingers to go. Oh, that's interesting. I kind of put a thumb in there. I think I'm going to keep that my thumb that's just me. I was teaching anatomy classes the other day. So looks like I've accidentally drawn her thumb in here as I was painting it. So I'm going to keep that in there. That'll just be my own little innovation to this painting, which could be blasphemous for some people, but you know, it's just that's my little happy accident here. So one of the things, if I had painted this right over top of some of the areas where the blue had gone over the yellow, I would really see that showing through right now. And it would be kind of driving me absolutely crazy, and I'd be thinking, okay, now I've got to do 3 more layers of this color just to hide those blue over spray, or whereas putting that little bit of white there is kind of hidden it. So okay. Now, obviously there's some shadows to come here. I'm not there yet. So even if this color isn't exactly correct, as I start adding some shading to this shape, I'll get a little bit closer as I kind of move into that phase of the painting here. I wonder if there's anyone watching from Brazil today, or if they're too busy out celebrating. I think what I'll do, I'll get this color in here, and then we'll do the yellow, and we'll do the warm green there next. Let's just zoom right in. This feels good. So I'm actually just layering it a little bit thicker around the head here to cover up any other lines, or the white and blue. Okay. Cool. So you can see it is a little bit streaky here. Part of that is because there's areas where there was yellow below, and now, and then I painted the white over top of some of that foundational yellow. Like even specifically right there. So I think what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll put, since I've got a lot of this flesh tone left over, I'm going to do this again, and I'm just going to get this really nice unified surface here. Really, it'll look like solid colors, blue, solid flesh tone, solid green, solid yellow. Speaking of which, I'm just going to take my my warm yellow, my original warm yellow that I put on here to start. Let's just paint this sun that warm yellow to get started here. Clean that up, and boom! What was once some blue painted right over there, it's all gone. Now, what should I do next while I wait for this flesh tone to dry? I think let's do the cactus. Let's get some warm green in here. So to make a warm green, let's need a bit more warm yellow. Let's actually zoom back out a bit. I'm going to take this warm yellow and put it down here at the bottom. Let's take some warm blue. Kind of mix these guys together. And let's just see the color that she was using here. Okay, let's get a bit more. Okay, so this is a little bit darker than this, but I think if I'm going to paint this over top of this, I think it should work really well, because we painted, this was a cool green. So now I'm painting this warmer green over top of it. So what's nice about painting a bit of a warmer color here is it's going to also want to pop a little bit off of that cool blue background. So we'll have a nice It'll help create a little bit more depth and space in this painting. And I think once I've got this done, all of these colors, then we're going to start putting some rendering on here. We're going to lighten one side and we're going to darken one side. So we'll put some highlights on here, some to give it the effect of, to give it some volume. Or if we go back to Tarsila's Teacher for Non-Léger, that tubist kind of look, right? Those round volumes. That feels so good. Makes me so happy. And, you know, like what I'm doing right now, all of this stuff, like just the surface of this painting is just gorgeous. Like, I just love the way it looks. It's like just the colors are now just so vibrant. We don't really see too many brush strokes in here, so it just looks really clean, really slick. This figure still, I could do another coat of the flesh tone, which I still got lots of that paint left over, and I'm going to do that in a second. And I think it's just going to be like, what, like, even, I mean, to the point where I could literally just stop at that point if I don't want to do any of the shading on these volumes. I think I've got something that looks really, really really nice. And that's because I've done several layers of paint. Really, I mean, just two, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, so let's zoom back out. And just take a look at these two paintings side by side after, you know, really we've been painting for, what, 40 minutes, and this is where we're at. Really, really nice. That kind of drives me a little bit crazy. There's a bit of... Let me see, I got some of this blue. Sometimes some of those like patchy areas you can't see until a little bit later on in the painting as the paint starts to dry. So it's always kind of nice to have just a little bit of extra paint left over when you're painting larger areas, so that you can do a quick little touch-up, and it should dry fairly evenly without having... I mean, again, so right now I could turn this into a finger here, but I kind of like the idea that I made a mistake and accidentally I'm going to end up painting a finger and her thumb in there. So, like Bob Ross talks about, you know, those happy accidents. So let's clean that. Oh, I see another little bit. I mean, now that I've got it so it's so clean and slick, it's like then it's like, wow, oh, I could just it's basically perfect, the surface. So it really then suggests that I could keep on going again and again and making things even closer to perfection, which is a little bit scary, because sometimes then you really can go the other way too far, where you start kind of obsessing about things, which I'm just starting to do. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna blow dry this painting again so that I can do another coat of this flesh tone over here without wiping some of the wet paint away. So I'm just gonna mute the microphone. Okay, I think that's good enough. I could blow dry it a little bit longer to make it even better, but no one wants to watch somebody blow dry. Literally watching paint dry on television for too long, so I'm just gonna move forward here. Put another coat of paint again. And wow, that looks so nice. It looks so clean. And I'm not usually someone who obsesses over, like, you know, surface and the smoothness of colors, but boy, that just looks... Okay, so those are all the big areas of color now. Got just enough paint to kind of come in here. Get all the little details and the fingers. And then I might just take a second here. We'll maybe look a little bit while things are drying, because it'll be kind of a good point in between this step and really what will be the final step is just adding the shading, the dark areas and the light areas to the painting. So maybe we'll just take a little break, we'll talk a little bit more about her biography, the role of her husband in the Cannibal Manifesto, which she wrote, but she also played a very big part in the popularization of that document through this very painting. Now, the original painting itself is about 5 times the size of this. It's, we can find the number here shortly. But it's, I would say probably, let's say 30 by 40 inches maybe? Maybe a little bit less. So it's obviously much larger. So some of the small details like the face and the fingers, that kind of stuff, if it's driving you crazy, just remember you're working, and assuming you're painting on the same size of canvas I am, you're working on a much smaller scale, right? Okay. I mean, I'm really happy with the way this looks right now. To the point where if I had to stop, I wouldn't be, I could live with this painting kind of like this. I mean, I probably would want it to be a little bit, I'd like to do all of the rest of the painting, but I think I wouldn't be too bummed out about this situation if I had to stop. I'm going to take the same color that I just was painting. I'm going to paint this inside here. And I guess as I look at it, you know, the lines that I did in there are certainly much darker. My original pencil lines are showing through. So, I mean, I could paint some white to get rid of them, or I can just kind of embrace it and just let them stay there. And I'm just going to paint over top of them with the exact same color I've just been using. And if I look at that and I feel like these lines are now a little bit too prominent, well, maybe I'll decide to paint over this. All right, I'm not trapped when it comes to acrylic paint. It might require a little bit of finesse or whatever but you know, I think that's fine. That looks great. So, let's move let's just clean some of these brushes. Get rid of all that excess paint, because maybe I'll want to use that excess paint, so I don't want to just throw it all away. So, wow, lots of comments in the chat. Let me see, where do I start? Do I go all the way up to the beginning? Maria said, "Hi everyone, I'm so excited today. Tarsila is one of my favorite painters of all times." And Donna says, "Hi Maria." Maria says, "Hi Donna." Marie says, I already did this one on my own some time ago, so I'm looking forward to comparing it to today's version. That'd be really interesting. I'd be, you know, as I always say, my approach is just one of an infinite number of ways that you could do this painting. So, this is not gospel or anything. I do think that we're going to end up with a pretty darn good looking painting. I'm already very happy with the way things are. But, you know, I mean, in fact, it might be fun just from maybe as a viewer to if I did like the same painting 10 different ways, so that you could kind of see how many different ways you could do the same thing. And so by no means is my way the only way to do it, but come on. Now that our daughter is awake, I can turn the baby camera off there. Okay. Maria says, with the political economic crisis, there is not so much to celebrate today in Brazil. That's definitely true. Brazil and a number of other South American countries have been hit hard, not just by the pandemic. That's sort of been almost like the what is it, the needle that breaks the camel's back. I'm forgetting my metaphors, and but yeah, absolutely. There's definitely been some instability for a while for various different reasons. But, you know, if I know anything about Brazilians, they can party, and I'm sure people will find a way to put on a strong face and to dress up and have a good time, right? Heidi says, salute to all my helping grandmas. I was with my grandparents for about 9 years in another city, a few hours train ride from my parents. My grandma was from an aristocratic background and never lost her temper. Deborah says, wow, Heidi, you must have been very close to her. And Heidi says, yes, Deb, she was like my mother. And Donna says, I like the sun like that, Michael. Okay. So, and as I said, this technically is a flower on the cactus. But Tarsila also, you know, as she was doing it, she knew full well that it also looks like a sun. So she was playing on this idea of like the sun being kind of this external thing way, you know, out there in outer space, but also like the generative power of what is here on Earth, and more specifically in Brazil itself. That Brazil itself had this like glowing, powerful energy, because, you know, at this time, again, remember, Brazil is was a Dutch colony, then a Portuguese colony. Like, you know, there's levels of colonial oppression that is, you know, that indigenous Brazilians were under for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And basically, the people who had been living in Brazil for 10,000 plus years were sort of in the middle between all of these other European powers that were exploiting the resources and people of Brazil for much of its kind of modern history. And most of the people in power in Brazil were all, you know, Europeans of European descent, and the artwork that they saw was essentially, you know, European, you know, people who were taught how to paint like European painters in the classical style, and they were basically, and also even just painting European images. And even if they were taking that style and trying to paint some, you know, Brazilian landscapes, they always just sort of had this look of European paintings. So at the turn of the century, you have artists like Tarsila. She goes to Paris and she sees artists like Picasso and Matisse and Fernand Léger and others who are just like making a break with the past and saying, you know what, the Academy is dead. We want to paint what we feel inside. We want to paint the world as we see it. And so she goes there and she sees this, and it's like, can you imagine how inspiring that would be for someone from Brazil or from anywhere outside of Europe? And you're like, wow, the Europeans are throwing off the weight of history and of the Academy, and they're going into this unknown future. Hey, if the Europeans are doing that, well then, of all the people, we should be doing that even more, right? So that kind of is this, it sort of unlocks the potential, I think, for her to really let loose and to be really expressive. And so she kind of takes that excitement and enthusiasm of this modernist break from the past, returns to Brazil, and starts thinking, like, what would that mean? Like, if we were to eschew the everything we've been taught about how to paint by our European trained teachers for generations and generations, what would we paint and how would we paint it? Right? So, those are not easy questions to answer, right? At the same time, she falls in love with her husband. Actually, let me just show a little bit of, because I can't remember how to pronounce his name here. Oswald de Andrade, I think. I've heard his last name pronounced so many times so quickly that I like earlier today, I'm like skipping. So Oswald de Andrade, I think, is how you would pronounce it, but Oswald just for short. Her husband Oswald is an artist, but mostly a writer himself, and a fairly important figure in Brazilian cultural history. He writes this. Where is it? Does it show the name of it? The text that he writes. Okay, so here I'm just going to bring up. So he authors this Why is this not on the screen? There we are. The manifesto Anthropophago. Anthropophago is, if you translate that into English, is anthropophagic. And anthropophagic literally means the eating of human flesh by humans. And I actually looked up what's the difference between anthropophagy and cannibalism. Cannibalism is technically any animal that eats its own species. So a wolf that eats another wolf is a cannibal, right? But only a human can be engaged in anthropophagism, right? However, that is a jumble of Scrabble letters in there. Anthropophagism is the eating of human flesh, right? And so we go back to this idea of her going to Europe, seeing what's happening in Europe with like Picasso and Matisse and Braque and all of the other painters there, and just like her fellow Latin artists like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo and Cisqueros and all the other great Mexican artists, they also think like, wow, here's an opportunity for us to really embrace our own culture. And so Oswald writes this manifesto, the Anthropophagic Manifesto, otherwise most commonly known in English as the Cannibal Manifesto or the Cannibalistic Manifesto, or and the idea is it's not encouraging people to eat other people. It's not about any kind of horrific thing like that. But the idea is about literally digesting, eating, consuming European culture, and even more specifically European modernism, right? And these great paintings that are being made by the European avant-garde, eating them and digesting them, and then kind of like using it to empower themselves to create their own things. And this goes into a whole other conversation, which I don't want to go too far down because it's a little bit disputed, but there is there's quite a heated discussion as to whether the indigenous people in Brazil had some anthropophagic tendencies, that they would literally consume their, not only their enemies in after wars, that they would eat the flesh and organs of the people that they conquered, but also that they would do that to their friends and family as a way of keeping their energy within the group. And again, that's hotly contested. There's certain people, I went down a internet rabbit hole on this, so there's definitely some people that can cite all sorts of evidence of this, and then there's certain people who think that that's a colonial mindset that of sort of as a way of making other these people and saying that, oh, they're worthy of being colonized because they're savages, right? And we're going to bring culture to them, right? So, but within his manifesto, he's what is, maybe it is actually mentioned in here. What is the, actually, here's some of the stuff that we're talking about right here. So here's like an image of this woman who's carrying these body parts that she has and that they're consuming. Okay, so one of the early original indigenous tribes or peoples in Brazil was the Tupi. And so Oswald, in his, like, one of the first lines of the text is Tupi or not Tupi. And which is a play on, obviously, Shakespeare, but that is, that again, that idea of consuming the European culture and then to create something new and unquestionably Brazilian out of that whole consumption and production process, right? Okay, so I decided I'd mention all that there. As I said, I'm not saying that any of that is real or not, but that just to give people context, that is all part of this discussion. Okay, so I think this is nice and dry. As I said, you could just end the painting here, and I think you'd have a pretty satisfying effort today. But what I want to do now is I want to get the rendering on this painting done. So, if anything, I look at this, I could have painted this flesh tone a little bit lighter, because this is, you know, ideally I'd like to be right here. I'd like to have this color here pretty much over top of everything, but we can always just glaze a little bit of a lighter color on top. In fact, well, should we do that right now? Maybe we'll do that right now while I'm talking about it. What should we do? This might be a little bit too big of a brush. Let's go down just a bit smaller. So now what I'm going to use is my glazing fluid, my satin glazing fluid. Satin means not shiny. If you wanted, you could use the glossy glazing fluid or gloss glazing fluid, which I do have actually. Right, so this one is shiny, this one's not shiny. Personally, I've always preferred matte or not shiny for anything I'm doing, except at the very, very end when I would use a gloss, which I don't really even do that much at all anymore. But if you were to use a varnish, varnishes are most of the time glossy, because you want to put that gloss on at the end because it's going to make all of the contrast, especially the darker colors and the lighter colors, really, it creates more depth in there. So, you know, that's why when you go to a museum, usually the painting is a little bit reflective. And if you've ever been in a museum, you're trying to take a picture of it, and you're just like, and it's kind of reflective. Well, might be because there's glass on there, but usually they use some very expensive non-reflective glass. So it's usually the varnish which has a little bit of that shine on it that makes it kind of hard to get a really nice photograph. Which they count on happening so that you go buy the postcard and mug and umbrella and everything in the gift shop later. Okay, so let's take a bit of this glazing fluid, and I'm going to get that on my brush right now. And then I'm going to take some white paint. We'll do just a little bit of this to start. So, glazing, I think, I've always described it as like the perfect tool for a beginner painter, especially a painter who's a little bit nervous about taking some risks, because you can go nice and slow. So this is now I've lightened this color up with a little bit of white. I'm going to use a blending brush to help, and I'm just going to get rid of some of the excess so it's not quite so bright. And I'm just kind of painting just the interior here, not the whole thing, but you can see here's on the ankle right there. And really all I'm doing with this is called your mop brush, is just trying to kind of soften the edges out so that we don't get it too, we don't want any kind of like hard lines between things. Let's zoom into the foot here maybe. Okay. So I'm going to do this. Actually, I'm going to go down to a little bit smaller paintbrush here. I just started painting the toenails, which are a little bit lighter and darker, depending, but your toenails tend to have a little bit of they look, or any kind of nails are usually a little bit lighter than the rest of your flesh, right? Okay. So you can see, like, can be a pretty slow process. You can go much faster just by literally putting a thicker coat in places, but I think I'm just gonna take it a little bit slow. I'll just back it out a bit. You can see, because I can always build this up and make it more and more apparent. But what else? Let's go to the hand here. Okay, let's just keep going up the body here. Now it is a little bit brighter on my in reality than it looks like on camera, I think. So I am being slow, but I think usually when you see when I back the camera out a little bit, I think it's just looks a little bit darker when I'm zoomed in for whatever reason. Must be might have accidentally got it on a little bit of a higher aperture. Okay, so let's just zoom back out. That was very subtle. I probably could have just gone right to the dark first, but since I was just talking about going the lighter colors, I figured let's just do that. So I'm going to clean this brush off, and I'm going to go the opposite direction now. So I have to think about where I'm going to do that on my palette. Okay, so I'm going to take whatever's left over of this paint. Let's put it over here. And of course I could just... I'm going to mix a little bit more just while we're right here, because this paint is getting a little bit used up. So here's this paint. Now I'm going to make it darker. So I'm going to put more blue in there than I had before. And uh-oh, it's gone green. Uh-oh, I guess I messed up. Oh, we just need to add a little bit more red in here. Right, because we're making a darker brown. Now, she didn't go that dark. You know, if we look at, oops. Yeah. I mean, it's not like there's black in here. This is really just a almost, actually, we're probably pretty close to it right here. Now, I was going to go to even darker, but actually I think that might be good. The only thing is that if I add glazing fluid to it, glazing fluid will make it a little bit thinner, and I won't see... It'll just lighten it up because it's more transparent, right? So let's just get this. That's pretty good. That's basically about the darkest on there. And you know, now that I have this, it does make... Well, we'll do some glazing, and then I might actually outline a tiny bit with this dark color. Okay, now that we've mixed it, though, I'm just get some of this excess off. And I'm going to use a quite helping portion of glaze. And I'm not going to mix it into everything. You saw that I was just basically mixing it into what was left on my brush. Because I want this to be relatively thin. Right, this is what I usually do when I'm testing it out. I'm testing it on the white just to see how dark it would be. Right, you can see how opaque this is. Here's where I've added some glaze into it. And even then, it might be still a little bit opaque. So if I just put... Okay. So, where should we begin? I'm going to probably, I'm going to use a bit of a smaller brush. We'll kind of build up. How about, I hope all those glazes are dry. You know what? I'm sitting here thinking, I hope they're all dry, because if they're not dry, then I'll start scrubbing some of that off. That's usually what happens. So, to avoid that from happening, I'm going to use the blow dryer again here. Okay. So I'm just going to start kind of right in here. All right, you can see if you're using a little bit of glaze and you brush it away pretty quickly, it is, you get a really nice level of transparency. And it's also doing kind of the effect of filling in some of the little gaps and spaces in here. Now, could that be darker? Absolutely. I could certainly go much darker. But I'm just going to go nice and slow. And that way, you can kind of just see how I would build this up. And I'm also working in small areas, right? I'm not going big and taking up, going for doing the whole leg all at once. I'm just doing little sections at a time here. Looks like there was some paint that was still a little bit wet there. That's a little bummer. Oh, and that's, I'm just realizing I put this there's more space in between her toes than there is. I don't know how I goofed on that, but I did, and It is not a problem at all. What is going on here with my... Let's just keep kind of crawling up here. Wasn't the best use of this, but okay. I'm gonna take a little more glazing fluid. Where should we go next? Let's do... I'm going to go all the way to the other side of her body, the back side here. Oh, that's very subtle. I think it might be just too much glaze in there. I mean, it's not you can't really have too much glaze. It just means the effect is so subtle that it's going to take many layers to build that up. So I just added a little bit more paint into my glaze. I'm not going to do... I'll wait for this edge to dry before I do that again. That's fun. Like, to me, I think it's kind of funny to do this and adding a little bit of my own twist here just by accident. This thumb or the toe being a little bit further away. I think I gotta turn this just so that I can get at this arm. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out just so you can just see how this is taking shape here. Oops, might be a little bright. Okay, so I'm taking my time. I could do this much faster and be done here in about 5 minutes, but just I think it's helpful to see how the process works, especially if you're a beginner artist and doing a glaze might be the first time you've ever done a glaze. So I'm adding lots of glaze in there, and there's really no hurry. Oh my goodness, that's okay. So I mistakenly put the top of the shoulder in the wrong place, so let's just fix that. We're just gonna have to darken that area a little bit more. So it's going to take just a few extra little bits to correct that, but I think that's the fun thing of using glazes, is that it's hard to, if you go slow, you can't really ruin your painting because you've got kind of like full control over it throughout the process if you're going slowly. And this is, you know, she was using oil paints and painting a little bit of a different way than I am, but we're both getting into we get to the same result, to get to the same finish line, just in a slightly different way. Now there's a bit of a line there. That just means I have to darken that again. Looks like it was a bit wet. So let's just, I'm going to kind of speed it up here now that we get the technique. I'm just going to go kind of outlining everything with this darker glaze. Remember I said I was going to come back and darken back here. Maybe not quite that much, Michael. So some of this is a little bit getting tacky now, so it needs some time to dry. I think I'm going to do a little bit more work on the body. Some of this area up here that I haven't really touched. I need a much smaller brush to do some of this glazing. So obviously it's much easier to do some of this glazing of small little areas when you've got a much larger canvas, right? I got a very little surface to work from and around. Let's see. I guess part of me is just debating how much of this I actually want to do. Like, do I really want to... I could spend a lot of time focused on this. Or I could do some outlining a little bit more quickly here. I think I'm just going to go pick up the pace even faster here. I'm just taking my paintbrush, getting closer into that brown as I mixed it with less and less glaze. So the mop brush is just like to help soften up the hard edges, right? Oops, gosh, you can't. I thought, here I'm thinking I'm in the middle of the screen. So there's little areas that I've gone over into the background. Drives me a bit crazy, but I'm not gonna let it ruin my day. I'm just going to continue doing this very light, very subtle, thin glaze around the outside edges to kind of outline things. I could have done this actually first before I even did that pass of light colors. You know, stylistically, she's decided to not paint the fingernails on the hand, even though she did the toenails on the foot, which is just a, you know, creative decision that she made. And if you're tuning in at this point and you see like, oh, yes, I did make a mistake and I accidentally just started painting in the thumb where there wasn't a thumb here. But rather than try to fix it or get rid of it, and, you know, I'm just like, I'm going with it. I'm going to embrace it. This person here's got a thumb, so. And, nothing wrong with thumbs. We all need them. So goes without saying that when I'm doing this kind of blending, I'm also trying to blend inward and not over the background. I don't really want any paint on the blue sky, although I can always touch it up afterwards. And worst comes to worst, I could always do another coat on the background if I had to. Wouldn't be ideal, but if I had to do it, then, you know, then I would do it, right? What are you going to do? Ay, ay, ay. I had a feeling that was a bad idea, putting so much glazing fluid on there. It's one of those things where sometimes I just get impatient, and I think I'm going to cut some corners real quick here, and then it's like painting just says, nope, you're not going to do that. Ay, ay, ay. Ah, making it worse. Getting paint all over the place. And I don't have any napkins or cloths ready. Ah. Isn't that always the case? A little bit of toilet paper quickly in there, it's okay. Ah! Oh, good. Didn't see that on camera. Okay. So, things are getting a bit sloppy here, but again, the good thing is if it's a little bit sloppy and I'm using glazes, two things can happen. I can easily kind of wipe it away because the glazing fluid has a slow dry property that slows the drying time down. What on earth? So the glazing fluid has a slow dry chemicals in there that are gonna slow the drying process down so that I can wipe things away if I need to. I mean, it's intended to help me blend things, right? So there's that. And then there's the other thing, is because I'm doing, it's relatively subtle. I mean, it seems pretty bold at the moment, but it's certainly much more subtle than if I had used various other techniques to, like, so that right there is not to my liking, but I can fix all that, right? This is an area where I kind of bungled things, but I'm just going to let it sit, let it dry. While it's drying, just paint some other things. In a moment here, I'm going to move on to the cactus as well. And that'll be a good way of just ignoring the problem areas. I'm always surprised, just over the years as a painter, areas that I was obsessing over because there was some sort of problem with them. If I just let them go and work on another part of the painting, I can't tell you how many times later on I've been okay, so I'm just gonna do this, and then I'll come back and I'll fix this, and then I look at it and I'm like, okay, sorry, I can't even remember where was the problem here. I can't even, because sometimes that problem seems to be a problem, but then when more of the painting gets filled in, that problem just sort of disappears. And you can't even remember what the issue was. You know, it's sort of like how time heals all kind of thing, right? Sometimes you just need to take a breather, put the phone down, or your laptop, go get some fresh air. And then whatever it was that you saw on the news, or a friend said, or you saw on Facebook, whatever it is all of a sudden, maybe I'm not going to post that comment on that blog or news site or whatever. And then later on you think like, whew, thank goodness I didn't do that, because probably would have got me fired, or made an enemy with my best friend, or some kind of thing like that. Okay, let's go right. Now I'm going to go into the face here, and it is a little bit darker. I'll leave that for a moment. Maybe I'm going to get a bit more blue and mix it into this. Well, you know, I think I need to take my warm blue. I was going to mix a much darker color. I think I'll do this with some cool blue and warm red in a moment, but let's just brush a bit of this in here. This is just adding a bit more warm blue into my brown. Which is not bad. Maybe it doesn't have to be quite so dark in retrospect. I'm not gonna think about it. I'm gonna blow dry everything again, just because there's a few places like here and here that are kind of driving me crazy. And then we could move on to the cactus, or maybe I should just move on to the cactus right now. Let's do that. I've been fiddling with the face and the body for a while. And I was just telling a story about moving on and not fiddling in an area. So I think I'm just going to take my own advice. So I see Deborah in the chat, or Maria says, happy painting people. I'll catch up tomorrow. Deborah says, good night, Maria. Also must go. I'm going to finish this, the other painting by Tarsila later on. Oh, it's interesting. You know, now that I'm looking at this, I didn't even notice there was a bit of like a shadow on the sky itself. That is a really interesting little innovation that she's done in that painting. You wouldn't really think of like the cactus as casting a shadow onto the sky. So what is that about? What is she trying to do there or say there? It's like she's making the... I mean, that would go right into these ideas of flattening space that, you know, the cubists were interested in. I don't know. It's oops. I'm just looking at this sun, and I'm just gonna paint a little bit of just warm yellow back over everything, including these darker lines that I painted here. It is getting rid of some of the luminosity. So yeah, it's okay. Just took some of the brown from the darker sides of her body and painting that in there. So let's, as promised, move on to the cactus, and we can even use some of the same glaze we put on the cactus onto the ground as well. So let's zoom that out. Okay, so I'm going to take some warm yellow, a little bit of blue, warm blue. Let's take some more warm blue. You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to mix up which I haven't done yet thus far, and I need some more cold blue. I'm going to make my darkest color for the palette. Gotta clean all these. Oops. I gotta clean some of these paints tubes. So I'm going to take some cold blue and warm red. Let's mix that together. I have way more of this than I'll need for this painting, but so I mix this together. Cold blue and warm red are going to get me the darkest possible color. I'm going to add a little bit of cold yellow in here. That's going to turn this into a gray. And I can use this. I could use this as the darkening agent to glaze with. The only reason I don't want to do too much of that is it's such a neutral color that I'd rather mix some of this into my darker green. So let's say I put this here as intended, and let's mix this into the green. So this is going to go in here to darken the dark spots. Okay, I'm just mixing it up nice and thoroughly. Now let's take some glazing fluid. Put that off to the side. I'm going to clean the brush off. I'm not going to put it in the water, but just all the excess. And then now here, now that's a very, very thin glaze. If I paint this on there right now, I won't see anything. So let's get a little bit more paint. Okay. And Even that is very subtle, but I like that. Especially at this stage, like I can always darken it just by doing more of it. That is very, very subtle. I'll probably do another layer. In fact, I'm just going to add more of the darker green here, just as I'm looking at the time. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of this on the ground, underneath the figure's bottom. This is what happens when I get a little bit hurried. So I put a little bit more glaze there than I should be doing at one moment. But let's just keep on going. Really what it is I just have too much of this darker glaze on my brush. It's easier to do when you have, it's a little bit of a thinner coat. Okay, so I'll let that dry, because if I start trying to glaze over the wet glaze, it's going to be a pain, and I'll be cursing the stars. So let's just kind of take a look and see how those last few things have oops, let's go back out a bit. Okay. So how about, let's go back to the figure here. There's a brush. Trying to clean up that little area that I goofed on. You know what? I think I'm gonna... I could be just doing this all afternoon. So we'll just do a bit more of this on the feet. Another thing too would be a good idea to have multiple of these mop brushes. So if you're doing blending in different areas of the painting, like I am, you're not going to be blending the green over top of these flesh tones, and then that's a whole other headache. So, you know, this is like my favorite part of making a painting. I see it's, you know, the least amount of people that have been watching thus far are watching. Maybe it's because people kind of have got, you know what they need to do, and they're just going to work on it. And I was a little bit later than usual starting today. But this is where I want to get to this part of the painting, usually as quick as possible. And all the things I do, which can seem like it's, you know, a little bit circuitous or whatever, are really just to help me get to this point as quickly as I can. So I could see some people who don't like, you know, some people really like the beginning stages of the painting and are not really into the finishing stages of the painting. It's just sort of like slow and boring, and that's how you get art movements like abstract expressionism, where people are just like, I like that, you know, when we're putting the paint on the canvas and we're doing that fast and bold. That's the most exciting part of the painting for me. And I love doing that as well. But I also just love this kind of thing where I'm now bringing details out. You know, it'd sort of be like the difference between someone who likes decorating cakes versus somebody who really likes baking, right? And they're not the same thing, right? You know, some people, you know, don't even, they want to be there putting the finishing details on the cake, and that is a lot of fun. But the whole mixing and kneading and all that is just not interesting to them. But obviously there's lots of people who love to bake. Our daughter loves to eat baked goods. We went for a long walk today and got a croissant, and all of a sudden she can walk for a lot longer once she's got her croissant. So let's just take a look and just see how we're doing here. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a little bit lighter. In fact, I could just take my lighter glaze that I used right at the beginning and go back over and lighten that part up. And there is some kind of glaze in the background too on the... I might just leave mine like that. I think I still want to do a little bit more on the cactus. So... take this darker color, mix it in, and kind of just do what I was just doing, like taking this dark color and doing a fairly, maybe I even go to a much smaller brush here. That brush looks like it's the end of its life cycle. I'm probably going to need to get a few different brushes, new brushes soon for these classes. And, you know, we're coming up on September 15th is the anniversary of the painting classes that I began doing. Prior to that, I was doing drawing and photography classes here on YouTube. And I think, you know, 125 paintings using the same $10 set of paintbrushes, I might be okay to invest, treat myself to a little bit a new set of cheap brushes, or I could, obviously I have some pretty expensive brushes in behind me that I've shown on camera a few times, but I've always just, with this whole series, wanted to use the most simple and accessible materials possible for beginner artists, so they really can see that there's no sleight of hand. It's not like I'm using the best of the best. Because, you know, sometimes people think like, well, I guess the only way to become a good artist is if I invest in hundreds and hundreds of dollars of really top-of-the-line art supplies. Okay, I think we're getting pretty good for the one side, the darker side of the cactus. I'm just gonna do the same thing just down here on this bottom edge. It's interesting the way that she's darkened underneath the foot a little bit and the bum, but not the hand at all, really. I'm I think I am just going to put a little bit of shading underneath this hand. Not that I think that she's wrong. I'm just, it's also, I see where I could kind of clean this up, really, is what I'm thinking to myself. It's like, oh, you know, if I put a little shadow here, some of your little sloppy mistakes just sort of disappear, Michael. Just a little hint there. I think that makes a big difference. That's good. And that might be enough for that part of the for the bottom part of the painting. Let me see. I'm gonna use, I mixed up some of my dark color, if you recall, a while ago. And I'm just gonna put that on the face now. So this dark color is my warm blue, or sorry, warm red, cold blue, and I did put a bit of cold yellow in there just to balance it out so it didn't get too purpley. Pretty subtle stuff there. It's interesting. What is this kind of hat that she's wearing? Or I keep thinking it's a woman, but who knows? It could be anything. I guess I was just thinking it was a woman because she's a woman, but there's no real logic in that decision or thought, really. Be anyone. Okay, so I do see little shadows that she's got going on in the background. That is really fascinating. Do I want to do that is my question to myself. We could do a bit of it. We'll do maybe a little bit of glazing with it. Do it as a glaze. Paula says, after I understand a grandma is doing a thinking, it is capturing my emotions. I love it. And Jazz says, needs some toe jam. It looks great. Yeah, a little bit of lint stuck in between those toes. Otherwise, it's not believable, right? We need something that brings this sort of perfectly smooth human back down to reality. Okay, so let's take. I'm gonna take this green. Still have a bunch of it left over. Let's add some white to it. Actually, might be a lot. So I'm gonna add. Let's add a bit more. Which yellow should I? You know what? I should. Let's see if I add some of this cool yellow in here. Okay. Put a bunch of glazing fluid there. You can see I'm not going to put everything I just mixed in. And this previous green here is all dry, just so you know. Okay, and then I'm just going to wipe all of the original paint that was on there off. I have a feeling this is going to be very thin, so let's just get a bit more. And just because it'll be so much easier if I just rotate this canvas. So that was maybe a little bit on the subtle side. Let's get a bit more white in here. Just to speed up this process just a little bit. So I'm not concerned about how bright it is here. It's the transition between the middle and this color. That's really what I'm focused on. And then we'll go over here. That one was a little bit heavy on the white, so excuse me. I was going to go back and do the same thing on this one And then I was like, you know what? That's always when I start wiping glaze away when I do that. So it's best just to blow dry that. You know, we're pretty close. I mean, as I said, I could have stopped a while ago when I got basically the main figure in here. Now I'm going to take this glaze that I had earlier as a lighter glaze. No, this is good. So that mop brush is out of action. I thought I had another one somewhere here. I feel like sometimes my supplies seem to, even though I'm the only one who's using this studio, sometimes things just disappear, go for a little walk on their own. Right, so that area, now I'm going to darken it again, but I got rid of sort of the really heavy area there, where it's a little bit too dark. Yeah, so I'm getting close to being done, or at least as much as I think I'm going to paint for today. I could really do these cactuses more. Elbow, a little bit sharper point there, I think that helps. I guess the sun too, I could put a little bit of a lighter white around some of the edges too. There's always more, right? And especially I find like when I'm looking at a painting that is relatively straightforward like this, I feel like I see more things, more details that I could focus on. So I'm just going to blow dry this again. Okay, just gonna take my brown glaze that I had earlier. I'm just gonna come back up into this knee where I was just doing all that work lightening and kind of putting a bit of the outline back here that got accidentally kind of covered up. Just a little bit as an aside, like about glazes, is that as a, you know, this glaze has been sitting here for, you know, maybe over an hour. And as it sits there, it's going to get a little bit darker as the glazing fluid itself starts to dry out a bit. So just be a little bit careful if you're dipping back into an old glaze, that you might find it's like unexpectedly a different, darker shade than it was when you mixed it and when you were applying it earlier. For me, that's no problem because I'm just using it really for outlining at this point and just cleaning up some of my edges. So that's actually, I kind of want it to be a bit darker, but if I was trying to fix something on the interior of the painting, I have to be just a little bit more careful. Okay. Now I think I'm just going to finish the cactus and then I'm going to be done. I mean, I'm debating in my mind, do I want to do there is that, some of these shadows on the sky. It wouldn't be too hard to do. It's just, you know, like, oh, I'm almost done, and then I'm like, oh, I guess I could do that. Let's see. So I'm going to take this glaze here. I'm just going to get a little bit more white, because really what I'm just going to be doing is mostly just an outlining. Zip in here. The other thing that makes it unusual is she's painted this, she's got like this highlight suggesting that the light is coming from the right side of the painting. And then she's got the shadow on the sky right next to it. So, you know, from a illusionistic perspective, from a classical like lighting perspective, it's a little bit nonsensical, right? Why would there be the light, if the light is coming from this side and hitting this edge, the shadow should actually be on the other side. So again, this goes to show that she's clearly playing with our sort of expectations as to how light is supposed to behave, right? Sorry, I should maybe just back out a bit here. And or, you know, she might have just said, like, I kind of just think it looks good that way. You know? Sometimes you just gotta go with your instinct, and if she felt that it just needed that shadow right there, regardless of how it should be, then I also have a great deal of appreciation and respect for that. I'm gonna go back on into the opposite direction and just get a bit of a darker So you can see, like, sometimes I just do some of this smudging with my fingers as opposed to with a brush, and sometimes it is good enough. Okay. So, I could just end right now. Oops, I got some little drips of water. Must be when I cleaned my brush. I just got a little bit wild. Ah! See, I didn't get to it quite fast enough, and it dissolved a bit of that blue in the background. I might be okay. Can I live with that? Couple of things. I think one thing I wanted to do that I've been thinking about is I'm going to take a bit of warm yellow and take a bit of white. And where's my glazing fluid? I'm just going to take a little bit of glazing fluid. Just a little bit of this, super subtle. I'm just going to go around the perimeter. Let's zoom in here. I can use this to both clean things up and also just give it a little bit of a glow, which is what she did. So this gives it just a little bit of a softer edge on the edge of this painting. In fact, I can even just go in a little bit more. And I could potentially even just add some more warm yellow back in towards the center here. I mean, it's a super subtle effect, but I'm going to double down on that. Yeah. I'm going to paint this over as I see how it's working and that I like it. I'm just going to do more. I'll let it dry, and then I'm going to paint some warm yellow towards the center here. So that will dry for a few minutes. Okay. And then I guess I'll do the color, the blue in the background. So that looks like to be still a bit of a cooler blue. So where can I do that? I'm running out of space on my palette. I go all the way over to the far side here. I'm just going to take the cold blue right out of the tube and a generous helping of glazing fluid. See, that's going to give just a nice subtle highlight or shadow. Now, before I do anything though, I think I'm just going to blow dry the canvas so that if I want to do any blending, I'm not going to... I see a few things that are wet here, so I'm going to mute this microphone, and then I think we're about 5 minutes from being done. Oh, lots of comments here in the chat all of a sudden. Maybe the cactus is lit from behind is why it's got that weird shadow. I mean, if you imagine this as a sun rather than the flower on the cactus and it's casting light, we would expect the highlight to be over here and the shadow to be over here. I don't know. I mean, not that everything in life needs an explanation, right? And as I said, it's entirely possible that she was just doing it and maybe made a mistake and was just like, huh, I kind of like that. That kind of looks cool there. I just decided to run with it. So, it's, I have no idea. But it kind of, let's, now if this goes poorly, I can always just paint more white glaze back over top of the edges of this cactus. So I need a little more glazing fluid in there. It's pretty tricky to do in this tight little space here. Let's get a smaller brush. Actually, no, I should just blow dry that, but there is... I'll blow dry that and then I'll come back and do more. I think I'm going to just go a little bold here. And we have a bit in the top right corner. Barely visible. Let's do the same over here. There's a bit of yellow on this paintbrush, which is going to cause some staining, so maybe it's not the brightest thing, and she's got a little bit of that shadow right in here as well. Okay, so I'm going to blow dry. Yeah, I mean, I've kind of... I'm ambivalent as to how this looks. I mean, I'm happy that I'm doing it just because otherwise I would have... It's one of those things where I'm like, maybe I should have done that. You know, so I'd just rather do it and then see what happens. I don't know if, for our purpose, it might not be... Like, I don't think I've made the painting better by doing this, really. I don't feel it's like demonstrably a better painting all of a sudden. I think it's maybe a little bit closer to the original, but I could certainly see some people just leaving a detail like that out entirely. See, and I get like, especially right at the end of the painting, and I just want to just get done. What I'm doing is I put that glaze down, and it's almost dry, and I start glazing over top of it, and it's just, rather than sticking, it's scrubbing off. So I'm just gonna blow dry one more time, so I can fix that little thing. Oops. Sorry, I'm still muted. That's why I'm like, I always get anxious about muting that microphone. I forget to unmute it. Michael, what are you doing now? This is... Okay, we'll do this one more time, Michael, and then you're not going to touch that again. Okay. I need to blow dry one more time. Spent way too long on that part of the painting, but I do think it's interesting to see it. You know, the more and more I look at it, the more it I just think of it as a really interesting strategy. I'm not exactly sure what she was going for, but I think it probably, if I was to say what I think she was thinking, is that it might have felt a little bit like too simple, and I think adding that little bit there causes what I'm thinking right now, this like little bit of questioning. You know, like, why did she do that? And artists do things like that specifically to elicit that exact reaction, so that, you know, we're sitting there, you know, laying in bed, you know, asking ourselves questions about the painting, and it kind of sticks in our heads. And, you know, filmmakers do that kind of thing all the time. You know, where actors make choices like that kind of sometimes confound us, but make the character a little bit more believable. Because we all do things that are sometimes a little bit weird that confound the people around us, right? Okay. I think that's good enough. I think I can walk away. If we just look at the original. I mean, yeah, I mean, if anything, I could do the cactus even darker here now that I look at it on the screen. Like, some of the outlining, it could have gone even darker. But really, that's just a function of just doing more glazing, more layers. Obviously, she painted this in oil paint, and she might have made this painting just about as fast as we've done, even though it was larger, because with oil paints and the paint being wet and open longer, she would have an opportunity to really blend colors in a way that, as an acrylic painter, I don't have that that same opportunity. So, here's my name. And the date is September 7th. Brazilian Independence Day. This painting was on the cover of her husband's manifesto, the Cannibalist Manifesto, which is also one of the reasons why it achieved such widespread recognition and fame, is because it was so visible, because that document was widely distributed throughout Brazilian kind of art circles. Anyway, so I'm going to finish up for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. If you liked today's episode, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you want to contribute a small donation, there's the PayPal link down below. You can send an e-transfer by contacting me through the Facebook or through my website. All those links are below. Your financial support certainly means a tremendous amount to me. Like, everything around here is all through your generous donations. Obviously helping me out by just sharing this with your friends, uploading your version to the Facebook group, and participating in our community is also a great way to help grow the community, and helps, frankly, encouraging me to do more of these. So thank you, everyone, for your support and for painting along with me again as we looked at another one of my most favorite artists of all time. We'll see you guys in a few days on Thursday. We're going to continue Brazil. We're going to continue celebrating the art of Brazil. We got a couple more artworks to check out. And yeah, so we'll see you guys in a couple of days. I've got to run for dinner time. So we'll see you guys again very soon, everybody. Have a good night. Bye-bye.